Electric transport these days are all the buzz, and despite a significant drop in electric car sales at the time of recording in mid-2024, it's likely that electric transport will keep getting more and more popular. But is electric power the future in aviation though? Is the prospect of replacing internal combustion engines with electric in general aviation even realistic? General aviation, which to a large extent is long-range and long-endurance operation, is the Achilles heel of battery power. Of course, electric power has already had success in some areas of aviation. A notable example is the Pipistrel Velis Electro in the role of training aircraft. It was certified by the EASA in 2020 already, and in 2024 was granted airworthiness exemption by the FAA to be used in US-based flight schools. Besides the Velis Electro, at the moment there are dozens of electric light aircraft projects in various stages between prototype and production. Electric aviation is coming. But for anyone not actively involved in aviation, thinking that internal combustion power in light aircraft will be replaced by electric power in the next 10 years, I need to be clear. Airplanes are different to cars. And the reality is, it makes much less sense to fly on electric power than to drive on electric power. Bear with me and I'll take you through some concerns I have about electric aviation that no one is talking about. This video isn't about just bashing on electric aviation though. I'll approach it in an objective manner, starting with some notable advantages that electric power has over internal combustion power in aviation. The first advantage is that electric airplanes doesn't have to carry any fuel. Now, before you say I'm just listing overly obvious things, not carrying fuel eliminates the possibility of fuel leaks, fuel contamination, fuel unporting and fuel vapor lock, which combined is something that does take a toll in general aviation. Not carrying fuel also means there's no post-crash fire risk. History is littered with successful forced landings followed by deadly post-crash fires due to ruptured fuel tanks or fuel lines. And perhaps the best operational benefit for a pilot is not having to manage fuel while flying. No switching of fuel tanks needed, which results in less possibility of screwing things up. Also, fuel gauges are notoriously unreliable in some aircraft, and while it really is not excusable, it is easy for a pilot to forget to visually confirm fuel levels before flight. Electric doesn't have that problem. The second big advantage of electric propulsion is high altitude performance. As altitude increases, air density decreases, and all non-turbocharged piston engines, which is the vast majority of them, make less power. Not so with electric engines, which make full power up to any altitude. Electric engines also gets rid of the after-start warm-up times of internal combustion engines. No need to get oil and cylinder head temps in operating range before you blast off. The next advantage is electric engines provide near instant power with no risk of the engine stuttering or cutting out. And while it's never a good idea to just thrust the throttle forward due to the left turning tendencies as well as just good general airmanship, it also isn't good for many internal combustion engines, but has no risk of damaging an electric engine. Then we get to maintenance. Internal combustion engines, of course, are very maintenance heavy in contrast to electric engines which barely need any maintenance. The next advantage, which is not really applicable to turbofan or turbojet internal combustion engines, electric engines are much more reliable than piston engines. Even the most simple internal combustion engines have dozens of moving parts, where electric motors only have a few. Less moving parts means there are fewer parts that can wear and break. Engine operation is also something that is much easier on electric engines. No choke, no priming, no carb heat, no magnetos and no fuel mixture to set, and no oil temperature, oil pressure, CHTs or EGTs to monitor while operating the engine. Another big advantage is engine noise. To me, there are few better sounding things than this. this. But I can't impose my likes onto others, especially those that aren't aviation enthusiasts. So less engine noise is definitely a potential benefit in densely populated areas. And here electric engines allow for much quieter operation. But while quiet, electric engines in general are very powerful and are also much more efficient in creating power than internal combustion engines. Some would have noticed that I have not yet mentioned zero emissions as an advantage of electric aircraft. And while they don't have any emissions while flying, we all need to come clean and admit that the production of these electric engines and batteries are not emission-free. Not even close. The life cycle emissions of electric engines and batteries are around 65 to 70% of the life cycle emissions of internal combustion engines. So anyone thinking that their electric car or plane causes no emissions are mistaken. Of course, 30% fewer emissions is 30%, and big picture, that is a positive. Let's take a closer look at some of the Velis Electro's specs published by Pipistrel. The Velis Electro has an endurance of around 50 minutes plus reserve, although they don't state how much reserve, but I'm reasonably sure it's 30 minutes or less. Battery quick charge time from around 30% to 100% charge is around 2 hours. The engine makes 57.6 kilowatt for takeoff, which is 77 horsepower. It cruises about 98 knots calibrated airspeed, has an empty weight of 428 kilograms or 941 pounds, and with a max takeoff weight of 600 kilograms has a useful load of 172 kilograms or 378 pounds. Let's compare that to the internal combustion Rotax 912 powered Velis Club. It has an endurance of 5 hours and 33 minutes with 30 minutes reserve and a range of 625 nautical miles. The engine makes 100 horsepower, cruises about 133 knots calibrated airspeed, and with an empty weight of 340 kilograms and a max takeoff weight of 600 kilograms, its useful load is 260 kilograms or 573 pounds. That should give you an idea of how heavy battery electric airplanes are at the moment. And that's not even a true like-for-like comparison, as the internal combustion version makes much more power. But let's get to some concerns I have about electric aviation, especially general aviation, that I hardly ever hear mentioned. As I just showed, while electric engines are small and light, the batteries are big and heavy. On the other hand, fuel storage is easy. As fuel is a fluid, it can be stored in tanks of virtually any shape or size and can thus be stored in unused spaces like inside the wings. Fuel is also relatively light, and F-gas weighs 72% of the weight of water. Despite that, fuel is incredibly energy dense, at around 100 times more energy dense than lithium batteries. These batteries, however, are big and bulky. So the best place to store them is in the widest part of the fuselage, which is directly behind the pilot seats. But that takes up space that could otherwise have been used for luggage or seats, and thus reduces airplane practicality. Some place a smaller battery can go is in the nose behind the engine. But since it will need to be a smaller battery due to the available space, it is likely that a second battery will be required, which then again would need to go behind the cabin, using most, if not all, of the available luggage space, while also reducing useful load. Of course, bigger commercial aircraft have more space and bigger weight carrying margins. But an electric motor plus batteries are much heavier than comparable power output internal combustion engines plus fuel. So there is no scenario where an operator would not have to sacrifice useful load to carry enough batteries to provide adequate range and endurance for most common commercial requirements. That either results in less cargo or less passenger carrying capability, and the already fine financial margins of the operator will become even finer, and in many cases it simply won't be profitable to operate an electric fleet. To counter this, there could likely be subsidies offered to companies by governments for the purchase or operation of electric aircraft. But we all know that subsidies eventually disappear, meaning you, the consumer, will pay the difference to make these operations profitable, resulting in an increase in cost to fly as a passenger or increase in cost in the shipment of goods. Of course, the single biggest reason for all of this is the low energy density of lithium batteries. And the only way to get sort of acceptable endurance is to use more of these heavy batteries. Battery energy density will improve over time, but personally I don't expect it to improve leaps and bounds in the next 10 years. That means batteries will remain heavy and electric can't compete with internal combustion in most of general and commercial aviation. As it stands, the best example of a successful electric light aircraft remains the Velis Electro, with Pipistrel claiming, rightfully, to have set the standard for electric flight. But in Pipistrel's own words, the Velis Electro is designed to work alongside other fleet aircraft, presumably meaning conventional internal combustion engined aircraft, and therefore A to B flights are not part of the typical mission. This perfectly summarizes where electric-powered aircraft technology is at the moment. But even when battery technology improves, there are some problems that will be difficult to get around. One of these problems is the penalty of carrying the weight of spent energy. In the case of a combustion-powered aircraft, it gets lighter as it flies, as it burns off fuel. Meaning once the energy of the fuel is spent, you don't continue to carry its weight. Additionally, many airliners can take off with full fuel, but can't land with full fuel due to its weight. In all but the most catastrophic emergencies after takeoff, airliners often need to fly a holding pattern for hours to burn off fuel, to burn off weight before landing. Some even have the capability to jettison or dump fuel in case of such an emergency. Since batteries don't get lighter as they get drained, and the airplane keeps carrying the weight of this energy that's already been spent, the design of many of these commercial aircraft would need to fundamentally change. Flying on electric power is like permanently flying with full tanks of fuel, very heavy fuel at that. To a non-pilot, that might not sound so bad, but most pilots I know are never keen to fly with full fuel tanks. In general aviation, this presents a problem. The weight carrying capabilities of light aircraft is very small. When loading a light airplane for flight, the pilot does a weight and balance check. The weight of the pilot, passengers, luggage and fuel are used to calculate if the plane would be within weight and center of gravity limitations. This is required to do for every flight. We can often carry more passengers or luggage by carrying less fuel. Weight is weight, and reducing weight in one area means more weight can be carried in another, as long as the weight distribution stays within center of gravity limits. Batteries are heavier than standard tanks full of fuel to begin with, but now we can't sacrifice some of that weight to make for a safe flight, like we could have sacrificed some fuel. Until the weight of lithium batteries gets at least halved, there is no solution to this problem. But it gets worse. Have you ever wondered what the recovery procedure would be after ending up at a remote field, maybe having had to make an unplanned diversion out of battery power with no charging facilities? With an internal combustion plane, you get one of your mates to bring you some fuel. Or if it's a MOGAS-powered plane, you get a lift to go get some fuel at the nearest filling station. Inconvenient, but not a big deal. With an electric plane, how would you recover it? One theoretical option is to get a fully charged battery sent out to you to swap it out. But that could take days at best. A potentially better option is to get electricity to come to you. Maybe something like a mobile charging station or a beefy generator, if that is even an allowed way to charge these batteries. At the moment, the former isn't possible. Again, using the Velis Electro as an example, even in flight schools, quick swapping batteries isn't possible to do yourself. And even with qualified mechanics, with the batteries being liquid cooled, it seems like quite a task to switch a battery. That's not even mentioning that the batteries that together allow for a max flight time of around 50 minutes weigh 70 kilograms each. This presents a problem not only for the Velis Electro, but likely all electric light aircraft. With that in mind, what concerns me about this isn't only this terrible inconvenience, but the impact this will have on pilot decision making. As pilots, we constantly have to practice something called aeronautical decision making. When flying, things doesn't always go to plan, and it's not like a car that can be just stopped and pulled over if something goes wrong. And when things doesn't go exactly according to plan, pilots sometimes subconsciously lessen the amount of risk they think they are in and decide to push on regardless. One form of this phenomenon is called get-there-itis and is one of the leading contributing factors to light aircraft accidents and fatalities. What is get-there-itis? It's that urge to get to your destination. It could be an important meeting, a child's birthday, a wedding, or anything that is time sensitive, or just that want to get home. These are external pressures that affect decision making. Sometimes the weather doesn't play along with your plans. It might be a stronger headwind than planned for, or low cloud. It might even be that the battery didn't fully charge overnight for some reason. Faced with the disappointment of delaying plans and staying another day or two, or having to turn back or divert, and missing that important occasion, this often makes pilots justify pushing on regardless of the increased risk. Just push on. The weather will improve, the headwind will lessen, the cloud base will lift, the battery will last. It will all be okay. But sometimes it doesn't all end up okay. In these cases, how is flying an electric airplane as opposed to an F-gas powered plane going to affect pilot decision making? It is very unlikely that all airfields will have charging stations. Being electric powered, it will be more difficult to get going again after diverting and landing at a field with no charging facilities than it would have been to get fuel flown or driven in. So let's just push on to a field that is a little bit further away that does have charging facilities. It will be okay. See how easily this could become a dangerous situation? See how easily, just because of the inconvenience of being stuck at an airfield without charging facilities, could lead to a pilot not diverting when they should and instead stretching the battery reserves to get home or to a field that does have charging facilities. That's just an example, and it might seem like I'm looking for eventualities that might not happen, but I'm willing to stick my neck out and call it now that this will become a problem and it will result in needless fatalities. Another problem I foresee potentially contributing to this is battery charging times. Yes, battery charging times are always improving, but will it ever really get below 30 or 40 minutes for a useful charge? Maybe, but I think not soon. At some point, pilots are going to think, let's just push on. It's only 5 minutes into my battery reserve to go straight home instead of doing another landing and having to wait 40 minutes for a charge. These are not acceptable excuses, but this is a factor that will increase the amount of get-there-itis that will happen. Of course, Pipistrel discourages using the Velis Electro for anything other than local flights, so you could say the point I'm making is moot, and at the moment there is no real prospect of long-range electric light aircraft. Moving on, I mentioned that the maintenance on electric engines are very low, but even so, the engine does have a TBO of 2,000 hours, but I suspect it will be more affordable to overhaul than a piston engine. But the batteries has a lower TBO. In the case of the Velis Electro, it is 500 hours, but they did say that it should get increased. I don't know how a battery is overhauled, but my guess is it's more or less a replacement of the internal cells, and that the cost of this will be a good portion of the cost of overhauling an internal combustion piston engine. So while the running cost is less than a piston engine, those savings will go towards the 500 hourly battery overhauls. And with that in mind, I'm not fully convinced that the operating cost of these will be any less than a piston-engined aircraft. So what do you think? Will electric aviation be remotely comparable to internal combustion in the next 10 years? Are there other potential problems with electric aviation that I've overlooked? Or maybe some potential benefits that hadn't crossed my mind? Leave a comment and let me know. Thanks for watching. See you in the next one.